The collective non-conscious. The collective non-conscious. There are notable conceptual similarities between somnambulists and the technological non-conscious. Both consider the implication of the deep entanglement of brains, bodies, and the assumed orchestrating operational level of computational media technology. The technological non-conscious is, as such, an anticipator of routine patterns and regulator of habits and actions. However, rather than considering the brain-computer synchronizations as a characteristic of the cognitive non-conscious, as Hales does, our theoretical work begins by clearly differentiating the non-conscious from a cognitive framing of what Hales calls the unthought. We need to begin with Hales' critique of new materialism. She is broadly supportive of new materialists' desire to decenter the anthropological subject in the humanities and focus more on material and affective relations. She sees significant limitations. Conspicuously absent from their considerations are consciousness and cognition, presumably because the concern that if they were introduced, it would be all too easy to slip into received ideas and lose the radical edge that the focus of materiality provides. This leads to a performative contradiction. Only beings with higher consciousness can read and understand these arguments. Yet few, if any, materialists acknowledge the functions that cognition enables for living and non-living entities. Reading them, one looks in vain for recognition of cognitive processes, although they must necessarily have been involved for these discourses to exist at all. Evidently, anyone reading Hales's thought experiment will sense their own cognition in process. This seems to be an incontrovertible fact of cognitive thinking, which is to say the problem of imagining the collective non-conscious from within the cognitive frame is that the effects of the non-conscious must always travel through the conceptual filters of awakened human consciousness. Accordingly, the affective realm of the non-conscious can never escape cognitive perception. Hales's thought experiment nevertheless contains a clear cognitive bias that arguably misses some important points concerning a new materialist approach to unthought experience. Firstly, the decentering of the cognitive subject should not become confused with the disappearance of thought in new materialist approaches, which is to say, although cognition is regarded as something that always arrives late, thought does not vanish from affect. The becoming of subjectivity is, in this context, part of a process that does not eventually emerge as moments of higher consciousness, but these moments are what Whitehead refers to as self-enjoyment, as seen as a mere clasping of experience, and do not offer the kind of cognitive command post Hales proposes acts as a filter for affect. On the contrary, A new materialist approach does not regard the cognitive image as a superior intelligence or controlling switchboard center, through which felt experiences are ultimately processed. To be sure, the collective non-conscious is regarded as precognitive or a more than human experience. It is an impersonal user experience that exceeds the filtering of individual phenomenal experience. Secondly, although any attempt at higher theoretical analysis must clearly be filtered through higher levels of cognition, as Hales rightly contends, that should not preclude a theory of the unthought from speculating about precognitive experiences. Precognitive experiences. Precognitive experiences. This is an important point because the complex processes that move from precognitive to cognitive registers of experience make possible what Matsumi calls enactive speculations of the future potential of activity. As already mentioned, non-conscious experience is as such a process that has mental components of sorts. Indeed, everything has, as Whitehead argues, a mental pole. It is not, however, in the eventual awakening of these components in conscious cognition that choices are made, as much as it is the process itself that decides. Unconscious habits, for example, which are often misleadingly designated as belonging to the mind, develop through complex processes that enable decision acts to occur prior to cognition. This new materialist updating of the somnambulist owes a further debt to Raymond Roy's notion that perceptual reality is secondary to the primary of absolute sensation. Certainly, the embracing of this fundamental principle of somnambulism intentionally turns the cognitive frame of reference on its head by prioritizing the felt sensation of the unthought over conscious cognition. As follows, the collective non-conscious can be theorized as a primary and immediate experience of sensation, as differentiated from the self-organization of a secondary conscious experience that might also be regarded as awake or cognitively alert. Non-conscious affective experiences are not, like this, filtered through perceptions, but instead, consciousness is a derived feeling of immediate sensation. Subjective experience, therefore, comes about through the subsequent affecting potentialities of experience, rather than a phenomenological sense of a self. It is certainly in the felt experiences of absolute sensation, the sensation of sensation, or the experiencing of experience, that the somnambulist experiences the events, not as a cognitive command post, but as a mere foothold in the viscera of the event. Phenomenal Indeed, Whitehead explains how this mere foothold of consciousness in the event arises because the social subject's fragile grip on the immediate present is part of a peculiar completeness with the experience of past occasions. This is not, however, a familiarity of well-marked sensor in immediate presentment. It might mean, as Royer argues, that consciousness is just this secondary means of survival by which the organism is able to experience its own experience. As Elizabeth Gross puts it, consciousness is not a separate organ added to life at a certain stage of its growing complexity. Rather, it is a condition for the dynamic unity of an organism's capacity to survive or to act in its environment, in short, to enjoy itself. to experience auto-affection, immediate self-enjoyment. What this means for Whitehead is that although our perception of events seems to be guided by this conscious sense of familiarity, there is, in effect, an inflow of vague feelings of influences that overwhelm the organism. In this light, the experience of the event goes beyond the capacity to discern and can only really be felt. To be sure, the mere footing Whitehead's consciousness has in these inflows is remarkably somnambulistic. The influence of feelings operates on a half-asleep and dim consciousness. We sleep, we are half awake, we are aware of our perceptions, we are devoid of generalities in thought, we are vividly absorbed within a small region of abstract thought while oblivious to the world around. We are attending to our emotions, some torrent of passion, to them and to nothing else. We are morbidly discursive in the width of our attention. We finally sink back into temporary obliviousness, sleeping or stunned.